Test, 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 test. Go get some coffee. Test.
Take it off and put it on the stage.
Okay, just turn it. Okay.
But I'll get here soon after.
All right, no problem. Test, 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 test. Can you hear me, Todd? What happened to your team last night, man?
I saw the last 2 minutes. Oh, you got 10 sacks.
I know. 10 sacks. Yeah. Huh? We play them in the end of October. What? Okay.
I'm waiting for somebody to take Vanderbilt down.
Too big time. Can everyone hear me okay? Everyone hear me okay? No one can hear me. Everyone can hear me. Todd said I can't walk all the way over here. I have to stay like right here. This is going to be real hard. Stay right here. Thank you for being here. I'm told I have 40 minutes from right now. We'll make the most of it. Appreciate you being here. As Roger talked about last week, we're talking about the intersection of world and biblical history. So what we're trying to do is take the Old Testament, especially the Old Testament during the time of the kingdoms, and put it in context with world history. You know, sometimes I tend to think when I'm reading the Bible and I get the flood in Genesis 6 and I get to Abram in Genesis 12, I think, boy, this happened a long, long, long time ago. But it really didn't. It really didn't happen that long ago. Before there was an Israel, there was already a Mesopotamia. There was already an Egypt. There was already a Greece. There was already an Italy. And sometimes we don't think about that. We think, maybe we stop and say, the world began with Israel. But it really didn't. Israel came along much later. And as Roger ended his lesson talking about the convergence of Egypt and Israel. And I'm just throw up this map. It's kind of hard to see. But I just want to just throw it up for you to see. The little square is kind of where Sinai and Israel is in the context of Egypt. and the Egyptian and Israel history were very tied together, and we're going to look at that now. One of the interesting things, I think, see, this is the pyramid at Giza, and I'm sure some of you have seen this. I haven't had the privilege. Roger talked about the flood last week. They estimate that this pyramid was created like 2500 BC. 2500 BC. Now, to put that in perspective, Abraham and Sarah, when they were in Israel and there was a famine, and they went to Egypt, and we estimate that being around 2091 BC. So what that means is the Great Pyramid was already several centuries old when Abraham first went into Egypt. So it kind of puts that in perspective. You know, we tend to think, maybe from movies or whatever, that the Israelites built the pyramids, but they didn't. The pyramids were built long before the Israelites came into Egypt. 2091, the first time when Abraham and Sarah went to Egypt. And then we see where Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, 1898. Then Jacob and his entire family went into Egypt in 875. So you see, Israel, Egypt, so tied together. And then 400 and something years later, the Exodus begins. So we see where they were there. Joseph died. The next pharaohs didn't know Joseph, didn't care for the Israelites, started making them slaves, and then Moses was raised up to deliver the Israelites out of Egypt. And then 1406, 40 years after the Exodus, we see that Moses died and Joshua succeeded him. So this is what we're going to talk about today from this point forward. And 1405 to 1375, see, that's like a 30-year period. Joshua was leading the conquest into Canaan. 1375, 1043, about a 300-something year period, was the period of Judges. We're going to talk about that briefly today. Then in 1043, Saul becomes king. 1010, David becomes king of Judah, just Judah. In 1003, David becomes king of all of Israel. And then 970, 40 years after he became king of Judah, David dies and Solomon becomes king. We're going to go through this whole period in 35 minutes. So let's take off. Now, so when the Israelites were in the desert and Moses sent the 12 spies in to explore Canaan, and they spent 40 days going through Canaan, and they came back saying it's a land of milk and honey. Now, obviously, it wasn't milk and honey flowing, but it was an exceedingly prosperous area. So you might think that, oh, it's an empty area. Here, take this area because it's empty. It's not empty. And the spies, you can read all this in Numbers 13, but what the spies said, look here, the Amalekites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Canaanites. And they said, we can't attack these people. They're stronger than we are. And the spread among Israelites a bad report. It's a great land, but we're like grasshoppers in their eye. And because of this report, they were condemned to spend 40 years in a state of wandering. And after 40 years, Moses leads the people to the east side of the Jordan River, opposite Gilgal on the west side. And there he died, buried on Mount Nebo, and Joshua was appointed his successor, and that's when the conquest of Canaan started. Now, when they're on the east side of the Jordan River and they're thinking about crossing over into the Jordan River, they did not see this. There was no sign that said, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." It wasn't there. They did not see this. What they saw was this. Or maybe what they saw was this. 1 million Israelites getting ready to come into Canaan. And it's not, the people in Canaan were not very receptive. And there were a lot of people, as we just saw, there were a lot of people in Canaan. And here are some of the people that were already there. Now, in Deuteronomy 20, God told Moses and the Israelites, "I'm giving you this land, but do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them all. The Lord your God is commanding you. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things that they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God." So here are the people that are here's some of the people that are already in Canaan. And there's the Canaanites. The land gets their name from this area. They were a highly developed people for 1400 BC. They were very good in the area of building, in the area of art, in the area of trade. But their most important threat to Israel was their area of religion. They did a lot of evil things in God's sight, including child sacrifice, fertility rites involving cult prostitutes. Images of their gods were common in worship. And this is where they had the poles called the Asherah poles. They worshiped a god Baal and the goddess Asherah, and they made those poles. And we will see this all through the history of Israel. And God did not want the Israelites mingling with the Canaanites. Then we see the Arameans. Arameans up from the north. They had come down from the north, and they had settled there. David eventually had to fight them. The Midianites. Midian was below Canaan. Moses went to Midian, married a Midian woman. And when the Israelites were in their exodus, the Midianites would attack the Israelites. And they eventually moved up into southern Canaan. And then there were the Amalekites. And they were a nomadic people. You know, they are only mentioned in the Bible. There's no historical record of Amalekites. They're only mentioned in the Bible. They descended from the grandson of Esau. Amalek was the grandson of Esau, and that's where they descended from. And they were a pain in the Israelite side from the very beginning. The Jebusites lived around the city called Jebus. And the Jebus became known by another name. Anybody know what it was? Jerusalem. So they lived around Jerusalem. And that was the pre-Israelite name for Jerusalem. They were a tribe there. The name Jebus is not mentioned anywhere outside the Bible either. David eventually conquered that area and changed the name to Jerusalem. Then we have the Gibeonites. These are interesting people. We're going to see them over and over. When the Israelites came into Jordan and across the Jordan, and the first thing they did was conquer Jericho, wiped out Jericho, Ai. And all the tribes began to get a little nervous. I mean, this is a mighty people that are coming. And the Gibeonites, they fooled Joshua. They dressed up like they were poor, like they didn't have anything. They put on old clothing, they put on old wineskins, and they got old tired people, and they walked up to Joshua and said, man, we don't have anything. We don't have anything worth fighting for. We don't have anything. And got Joshua to sign a peace treaty with them. And they fooled Joshua because they were not what they said they were. And we're going to see more about the Gibeonites. So Joshua did not destroy the Gibeonites, did not wipe them out. And there were the people they called the sea people. Now, look, I don't know if you can see from this map, the sea people, they were just people who came and settled in this area next to the sea. But look, they came from Greece, they came from Crete, and they came in this area, settled in this area. They had wars with Egypt before there was Israel, but they kind of settled on this coast here. And the most famous of the sea people were the Philistines. Philistines is actually a word that means stranger. And they settled in 5 cities along the coast of southwest Canaan, Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. And the name Gaza is a name we're very familiar with. It's in the news every day. It is a Palestine city. Speaking of Palestine, see, the word Palestine comes, however it comes, but the etymology of the word Palestine comes from Philistines. And Gaza is a very important and well-known city. Gath is a well-known city. The people of Gath were said to be very, very large. And one particular person from Gath went down and fought David later. His name was Goliath. So the Philistines were a pain in Israel's side for the rest of their existence. Now, we might think as we read Joshua and as we read Judges that that this was they go in, boom, boom, boom. They conquered Canaan, and that was that. But that wasn't that. It was not easy. It was never complete. And we tend to think it was a short conquest. But for over 30 years, they fought these tribes. And if we read the Bible, we can see Joshua had like 3 strategies. They went into central Canaan, then they went into southern Canaan, then they went into northern Canaan. But they never completely defeated these tribes. But they said, but Joshua went in and said, here's your land. This is where you're going, this is where you're going, this is where you're going. And guess what? There's still going to be some enemies up there, and you're still going to have to fight them. Now, here is the map when they split up the land. And you can see all the way up here, the city of Dan up here. Dan to Beersheba. You hear them talk about from Dan to Beersheba. That's like completely north to south. And I think this is like 150 miles and like 40 miles across at the biggest point. So this is not a big area. And you see that some of the tribes came back across east of the Jordan, and then some of these tribes. Of course, we know the Levites did not have area. The Levites were embedded with all the tribes, and therefore Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, both got a portion, and Manasseh was split into two places. Now, originally, this area here, Gaza to here, and that's controlled by who? Philistines. This area was given to Dan, but they never could completely drive the Philistines out. So look how looks like Dan has got a little small section here. They had this whole section, but they couldn't drive the Philistines out. So they ended up with that. It was never it was not easy, and it took several years, and it never was complete. Just never was complete. So after that time, what did I say it was earlier? When 1375, when the conquest was supposed to be over. Then Joshua dies, and Joshua tells them, in Joshua 24, when he gives that great speech, it's not over, and you're going to have struggles. But he said, you're going to have to choose. And as for me and my family, we're going to choose the Lord, but you're going to have to choose because it's not over at that point. So when Joshua died then, they were in kind of a bad spot. And Judges 2, after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, so all that group had come over from the Exodus and Joshua and all those people who had fought in the wars. After they had died, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord or know what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. We talked about that earlier. God said, kill them all. They worship Baal. They worship Asherah. We got to get rid of them. Well, they didn't get rid of them. And now, after Joshua has died, the people started worshiping the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of the ancestors who brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the people. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. So in just a short period of time, we see that the nation of Israel was beginning to collapse because they followed the people who were there, who they had not quite defeated. So now God needed to raise up some more leaders to help the Israelites and to defeat the tribes that remain. And they were called the judges. Now, I know this is hard to see, but I'll put this in perspective. Each of these white blocks, so here's all the tribes, each of these white blocks represents one of the judges mentioned in the book of Judges. There are 12 judges mentioned in the book. There were probably many more than that. Call these major judges if you want, and there was probably some that were kind of minor judges that don't get any credit in the book, but there were probably other judges, maybe in much smaller areas with much smaller influence. Only 6 of these judges does the Bible go into a lot of detail about. So if you'll go back and read your book of Judges, you'll see that really only 6 of them get a lot of talk. Now, so Joshua died in 1375. The people went crazy. And in the book of Judges, you will notice this. There are 7 cycles that just repeat themselves. Now, you can remember that any way you can remember it. I came up with the 4 S's, kind of a good Marlon Connolly remnant there. So they would sin. They would go into servitude to whoever the tribe there was. Then they would be sorrowful. They would pray to God, and He would send salvation, usually in the name of a judge and the army that the judge was able to rule. But the book of Judges mentions this 7 times. And the period of the judges went from 1405 to 1050. So, if you do your math there, that's 350 years. 350 years. That's almost as much time as they spent as slaves in Egypt. So this is the point out. This has taken a very long period of time. They come out of Egypt 40 years before they get to Canaan. They spend 50 years trying to defeat these tribes. Joshua dies, and they spend 300 years in this whole cycle of sinning and God rescue them again. Now, in the book of Judges, they dealt with these people. And we talked about some of the people already, some of the tribes, but here's even some more tribes. Mesopotamians, Roger showed us a map of Mesopotamia, which is kind of the northeast. They came down, harassed the Israelites for about a period of 8 years. King Cushan, the Moabites, under King Eglon, they suppressed the Israelites for 18 years. The Midianites, remember we talked about the Midianites, how they harassed the Israelites during the Exodus, and they moved up into Canaan, and they continued to harass them during this period. And then God had to bring a judge to defeat the Midianites. Everybody remember that judge's name? He took an army of about 3,000. He narrowed it down to about an army of 300. Gideon. And he defeated the Midianites. The Canaanites, again, 20 years. Man, they had a hard time getting rid of those Canaanites. They were oppressed for 20 years until a female judge ended up defeating them. Remember her name? Deborah. And Barak defeated the army of the Canaanites. The Ammonites were a thorn in the Israel side for years, 18 years, they mentioned here. And the good old Philistines were pressed them again for another 18 years or so. So there was no rest. There was no rest. But they brought it on themselves mostly because they didn't do what God told them to do. So the judges had about a 350-year period there. And then the people got tired. And they said, what? What did they say to God? We want a king. We want a king. When we had the judge Samuel, one of the last judges. Samuel had 2 sons, and just like Eli before him, they were worthless. He appointed his son as judges, but they weren't judges. They needed judging themselves. Samuel was getting old, the sons were getting corrupt, and the people said, man, this is not working. We need a king. Samuel cautioned them about seeking a king. He told them all about the Eastern kings, about how they oppressed the people, how they were greedy, how they were self-serving, and they said, we don't care. We want a king. So Samuel then, under God's orders, anointed a king. And his name was Saul. And Saul, his whole reign was one of defense and struggle. If you go back and read in Samuel and Chronicles, you'll see that a lot of his time, he spent chasing whom? David. He's got all these tribes that we just mentioned that are harassing the Israelites, and Saul's chasing David. We don't see a whole lot during his time of him doing much to gain much ground in Israel. He didn't build palaces. He didn't build cities. He did none of that during this time. He waged war against the Philistines and the Ammonites, just like the judges had. He never had a big army. Most of the people in his army were from his tribe and divided into a couple of units, and some of them were in the south and some of them were north. He described, in the Bible says he raised up men of Israel, but he also used some of these tribes. He hired mercenary soldiers for some of these tribes to help him in another war. So he would get mercenaries from one tribe to help him fight another tribe. The Ammonites were beginning to take over Reuben and Gad's territory. The Philistines were taking that whole west coast. They were beginning to move in to the central, and he was just having a really hard time defeating these. They were ill prepared for war. They didn't have swords. They didn't have spears. They didn't have what the stuff the Philistines had, and they had a particular hard time. Now, the Amalekites is a very interesting story. You remember the Amalekites. God said, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did for opposing Israel when we were coming up out of Egypt. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And he said, he told Saul, go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them. Kill men and women, child and infant, sheep and camel and donkey. Now we think, man, God was really kind of cruel, wasn't he? He's trying to cleanse that area for the people. Now we know that Saul went in, slaughtered the people, but what did he do? He did not kill the king. He destroyed the people, but he did not kill the king. He spared the sheep, he spared the cattle, he spared the lambs, and anything that was valuable. And he did not destroy them. So God told Samuel, you got to go do something about that. And Samuel went to Saul and told him, you did not do what the Lord said. Samuel took his own sword and said the Bible says he hewed King Agag into pieces. This is good stuff, isn't it? Saul would not do what the Lord told him to do. Samuel had to do it. Samuel had to. Now here, this is small too, but this is in the purple here is the kingdom of Saul. I showed you the map earlier of the 12 tribes, and this is the kingdom that Saul had. It didn't encompass all of the 12 tribes. And look here, we got over here. The good old pain in their side is still over here. He did not defeat the Philistines. And his area, here's the Sea of Galilee, so he didn't go very far north. He just didn't do, these areas show some of the battles that he were in. He just did not do a lot to expand Israel, to help Israel. He left that up, or God left that up to the next guy, David. Now, David had a kind of a weird relationship with the Philistines. David was running back and forth from Saul, and he spent a lot of time in Gath, especially because Gath is the closest city to Jerusalem. David spent a lot of time in Gath. And sometimes when he was fighting against Saul, he would use Philistine mercenaries to help him in the fight. So he had a weird relationship with him. So when Saul died, the Philistines, they were happy. They said, "Oh man, David's king now. We can take this land and no more battles and none of this stuff." And they were wrong, because David drove all the Philistines out of the Israelite territory. And he sent his armies across the Jordan and defeated the Ammonites. He defeated the Arameans, the Moabites, the Ebionites. He defeated all of them. Interesting, there's our friends, the Gibeonites. We've talked about them earlier, how they fooled Joshua and signed a peace treaty. And Saul broke the treaty and attacked the Gibeonites. And there was a famine for a short period of time. So when David came in, David restored the treaty with the Gibeonites, actually killed some of Saul's own people, and got peace. He got peace with the people there. Now, David, we know the story of David. And David was a great leader. So the purple here was Saul, and David expanded. You can't hardly say it's a light blue. David expanded Israelite kingdom all through here. You see the arrows with the battles that he went in and he fought all the way up into Damascus here, and won these battles and expanded the area. And then David started building something Saul never did. David started building and started expanding the kingdom. So David was doing some things that Saul never got to. Now we get to the point where David is going to die. David had 19 sons. Obviously, he didn't spend all of his time fighting, did he? 19 sons and one daughter. So when he died, the logical successor was his oldest living son, Adonijah. He had Adonijah, I think, was son number 4, but the first 3 sons died, including Absalom, who probably early on would have been David's pick, but Adonijah assumed he was going to be the king. I should have mentioned earlier, back up, that when Saul died and David became king of Judah, Saul's son Ishbosheth assumed he was going to be king. He assumed he was going to take over for Saul, assumed he was going to be king. So he took over the northern part, and David took over the southern part of Judah until David was able to defeat him and take over the whole part of Israel. So that's why you saw when David was king of Judah, then David became king of all of Israel. He had to deal with Saul's son Ishbosheth. So these sons, did not give up their power very willingly. Adonijah did not give up his power very willingly. He wanted to be king, but he was not king. Instead, David chose a much younger son by the name of Solomon. And it's interesting, you know the story of David and Bathsheba. There's more verses, I think, devoted to David and Bathsheba than there are to David defeating the Philistines or the Ammonites. So even then, I guess we had we had a kind of a interest in stories like that. But anyway, here is the kingdom of David and Saul that Roger's going to get into, David and Solomon. Roger's going to get into a little bit more next week. So if you can see the colors here, so all the way down in here, David, see, here's what Saul had right here. Here's what Saul was controlling. David controlled all this blue here. David expanded Israel, all this blue, and defeated most of the tribes that were in this area. Then as Solomon comes along, and some of this brown then falls under Solomon. He even expanded the kingdom of Israel. And not only that, he had much influence even over all these areas. Solomon had a lot of influence. And we're going to talk more about Solomon next week and Solomon's kingdom. So that's, Roger's got Solomon next week. I'm not going to do Solomon. That's a lot of history, but I did it. Skipped over a lot of notes. I wish we'd had a couple of hours to do this, but a lot of history. Any questions, anything about this history that was confusing? It wasn't easy, and it wasn't short. It took a time. It took a toll for the Israelites finally to get a hold of the Palestine area. And it's not going to last long, is it? It's not going to last long. And we're going to see what happens next week. Okay? Hey, I'm going to show you one last slide. For those that know me well, you'll know what my favorite movie of all times is. My favorite movie of all times. So I'm going to leave you with a tribute to my favorite movie of all time. All right. Have a good day. I did. Hey, buddy.
Hey, Tommy.
Good to see you, man.
Question for you.
Sure.
What are the Nephilim still doing around?
The who?